Today I'm with Chris Cleave, the author of Incendiary, The Other Hands, in the US Little B, and his latest novel, Gold. Welcome, Chris. Your first book, Incendiary, is about a terrorist attack on London. It was scheduled for release on July 7, 2005, the day of the London bombings. A terrible coincidence. And you have said that you went to a dark place after the release of Incendiary, your first book. How did you motivate yourself to write again? And why did you continue to write in much the same style, where you base your books on current events?
I've always wanted to write about the times that we live in. I've never wanted to have the benefit of hindsight and perspective. I don't feel that I should own history and talk about how it should be perceived and analysed. I always wanted my writing to be a record of how it felt to live through the times. So I try to look ahead a little of the point at which I'm writing. I try to look maybe 2 or 3 years ahead and think, well, what's that year going to feel like? You know, what are we all going to be thinking about? And why will we be thinking that stuff? And what will be the psychological backstory behind why we will hold these opinions? It's a weird, it's a weird way to write, because I'm looking forwards into the future.
And now you're looking in 3 years' time for your next book.
You look forward. It's not actually very hard to think about, barring disaster, there are, fairly evident things you can do to say, well, what's going to be on people's minds? And then I like to ask a timeless question in that timely fashion. That's all my work is trying to do. It's trying to say, let's talk about the world we're living in now. They're very contemporary books, but I hope that at their heart of them, they all have a timeless question. So the question in Incendiary is, once you've had your heart completely broken, is it possible to live again? Is it possible to be joyful again? It's an old question, not a modern one. The question in The Other Hand is, how much should we give? How much should we step outside our comfort zone in order to help someone into it? And that's the old question of charity. But if I set it now, in our times, well, the way that question is posed to our generation is in the persona of refugees, of asylum seekers. And that's why it's such a hot button topic, because it's a timeless issue. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? It's people saying, well, look, these are the destitute, these are the downtrodden, these are the people who are dispossessed. Now, how much are you going to give of yourself, of your time, of your money, of your love? It's an endless and eternal question. Of course, I don't have an answer, but I think something that I can do as an artist is to pose it in a very contemporary way. And that's all I'm trying to do with my work, to look ahead, to think when it's published, what's going to be on people's minds, and what is the eternal backstory to the contemporary.
Gold, your latest novel, is about two extremes. On the one hand, you write about 3 cyclists, healthy, fit, going for gold. And on the other hand, 2 of the cyclists have a daughter who is gravely ill, her health failing her. Why such extremes in your novel?
This again is my endless question in Gold. The question is, how should we love in sickness and in health? I'm always amazed by these vows that people make to each other when they marry, which are beautiful vows, which people don't think about very hard when they're making them. I know I didn't. I was like, I just want to be married. Yeah. Where do I sign? But actually, what you realise is that you've pledged to love someone in sickness and in health, and I think this is the same assumption that people go into parenthood with. So no one asks you to state a vow, because it's so blindingly obvious that we're going to love the child in sickness and in health. But it's so hard to do. It's hard to love people in sickness. It requires more of a sacrifice. And so this is what Gold is about. It's about the extreme of good health as embodied in the lives of the athletes, and the horror of sickness, which is suddenly vested on them, and in a way they can't choose. You know, these two athletes who've done nothing other than push themselves to the absolute limit of vitality are suddenly confronted with this daughter who they really love, who's really sick and getting sicker, and they're going to have to change something. You know, they're going to have to choose between their ambition and their love, and that's the thing that life asks us all to do in the end.
Gold is in part an examination of parental love. Why have you used an only child, as you have done in both your other books? What is it you're demonstrating?
Great question. I think there's a very pragmatic reason why they're only children. I try to keep my cast of characters as small as possible. I try to put people in these propulsive situations that have a kind of containment that they can't escape from. And they talk with each other, they work out what their answers are to these big, timeless problems. And I try to have the smallest possible cast of characters to help them do that. So I think I'd be wrong if I didn't admit that there's a certain spirit of pragmatism in making them only children, you know, not having to have that extra sibling relationship to deal with. The second part of the answer is that in Incendiary, it was necessary for the woman to lose everything. She loses her only child, so that's really why it was an only child there. In The Other Hand, it was because she just hadn't got round to having another child, because they'd had this child, and that's when the problems in their marriage began. You know, so I've noticed this quite often, that people think that a child is going to fix the relationship, and it just actually exposes existing fault lines. And poor old Charlie, he's that kid who was the child that didn't really save the marriage. So there's sort of a reason for that.
When you were researching this book, you spent a great deal of time at Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, shadowing a doctor and speaking with parents with children who were gravely ill. You said of your time at the hospital that it was like being embedded with angels, but you must have seen parents in despair and very ill children. How was it like being embedded with angels?
In the presence of death and in the face of it, humans can do one thing, which is to fall apart mentally and lose their strength as people, or they can do another thing, which is to look at it with clear eyes and laugh at it. And I've found so many people in that place who are consciously raising their game and challenging death. Whether they do that medically, you know, I met doctors who are at the top of their game, great researchers who are pushing forward the boundaries, increasing the survival rate of these childhood leukemias. 40 years ago, 90% of these kids would die. And now 90% of the kids will go into remission. It's an extraordinary work. So they fight it with science, they fight death with love. A lot of the nursing staff were the most compassionate people I've ever seen operating. Great. And it's not just the simple things like sitting and holding a kid's hand. Compassion means everything about supporting the family and dealing with things that the parents are just too stressed to deal with, but will be helpful. Dealing with things like helping with the child's education, so that when the child gets better, one of the problems it won't have is trying to reintegrate with the school. It's like the whole piece of like looking after the whole person. So yeah, people consciously challenging death and considering themselves equal to the task. Yeah. That's why I found it quite sort of supernatural to be there, because you're in the presence of something which isn't in most rooms, which is the spectre of death, and you're consciously challenging it. And that's why I sort of consciously use the word angels to describe them, you know, so because they're operating in a supernatural realm, relative to our ordinary experience. And it's a bit metaphysical of me, but it's a place where the hairs go up on your neck when you start to realise what's going on there.
Recently you have cycled from London to Paris to raise money for leukemia research. Is cycling a newfound passion that you discovered whilst researching this book, or have you always been a cyclist?
I was also a recreational cyclist, and then I started taking it really seriously to research gold. Got a coach, started training. Yeah, and trained really hard and got really addicted to it. And this is definitely a problem I have. It's like obsession, addiction.
Right.
Cycling's a great addiction to have. It's a healthy one, and I got really into it, and I'm still really into it. I get really tetchy and irritable if I don't get out on the bike.
Okay.
It's hopefully that's the last and major obsession or addiction that I'll have. It's like a healthy thing with a good community of people who are very friendly. I've made a lot of good friends in the sport. I think it's a very beautiful thing. I've seen it be a transformative thing for lots of people. How else am I going to have my midlife crisis? I think it's spend a lot of time on bikes now.
You have said of your books that each book that you write asks questions. Doesn't necessarily answer the question, but you always ask questions. What is the pivotal question at the heart of Gold?
Of Gold?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. The question in Gold is what comes first? Our ambition or the people we love? If you pose that question in the abstract, it's a very easy answer. It's like, obviously the people we love. Yeah. Actually, but if you pose it on any given Tuesday, you get a very different answer. Most people have had the situation where their boss at work will offer them a promotion and a pay rise, but they're actually going to have to work a little bit more, maybe the next 5 weekends, maybe you'll miss your kid's school sports day. But actually, if you pose the question that way, most people will say yes to that. They'll say, yeah, okay, I'll take the promotion, I'll work the longer hours, I'll see my children a little bit less. So on any given day, the answer, what comes first, ambition or love? And the answer is often ambition. And what obsessed me about it is that over a whole lifetime, we choose love, and on any given day, we choose ambition. And that's the human condition. That's the fierce inevitability of constantly making the wrong choices and then having to pull yourself up out of the hole that is created over the course of a whole lifetime. How do you rebuild from the destruction that you make in your own life? That's what Gold is about.
Chris, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.